Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
We have seen in earlier lectures that technologies pose risk to human population and environment. Risk means potential harm to life or property. We are in era of convergent technologies on information technology, biotechnology and nanotechnology. Each of these technologies by themselves or in combination may produce a lot of benefits but also pose risks. Military technology, which incorporates all the new technologies, also poses problems for the humanity irrespective of who develops them and irrespective of which government uses. For example, information technology, we are now used to computers, but information technology used in scientific research, automation of production processes, telecommunications, telematics and satellite technology based mobile telephones. Mobile telephone revolutionized our communications. Administration also uses computers. Diagnostics, entertainment and financial services such as banking, insurance, electoral process, administrative and political surveillance and warfare. Actually, internet technology, radars and nuclear technology were developed in the context of warfare technology development that is explicitly based on political decisions. In fact, many of these have come into civilian use. For example, internet is a product of military technology development. The potentially profound impact of technological development on human society has given rise to new concepts like genetic citizenship, information society, and so on. So we have seen the pervasiveness of information technology that has come to be seen in our society today. Similarly, another technology that is going to have far-reaching impact is biotechnology. In earlier lectures on various occasions, I mentioned about the advances in molecular biology and possibility of developing technological interventions based on molecular biology. Advances in molecular biology has enabled scientists to understand life processes at molecular level, and this paved the way for intervention at molecular level. Among the techniques that involve transfer of genes from one organism to another organism across taxonomic categories, for example, from bacteria to food crops, and cloning have raised several apprehensions regarding the safety of the technology for human beings and moral, ethical issues and consequences for the environment. Similarly, I mentioned in my earlier lectures that genetic engineering technology has consequences for biodiversity. A commercial firm of one country may gain access to a medicinal plant in another country and make a commercial product out of it and sell it in the market. This is also called biopiracy. Some of the countries in the southern hemisphere of the world, Africa, Asia, Latin American countries, are mega hotspots of biodiversity. If the access to biodiversity and the use of biodiversity are not protected and regulated, the countries which are hotspots of biodiversity would lose. I mentioned in my earlier lecture that military technology or military weapons are developed basically with a political purpose to protect sovereignty of a country against aggression of another country and in situations of emergency to control internal law and order in a given country. One can criticize as to why we need weapons. Every country devotes precious part of their budget or revenues towards weapons development or acquisition of weapons from other countries, ostensibly on the ground of protecting the nation. One more technology I would like to mention is nanotechnology. Nanotechnology has also implications for our environment and health. For example, nanoparticles are very, very tiny particles which are, if they are not contained, if they are released into environment, they can enter the skin of our bodies because they are so tiny in size and can create problems. That is why nanotechnology also requires some kind of regulation. Now, people are talking about introducing nanotechnology or using nanotechnology in agriculture for delivering micronutrients, sometimes pesticides and so on. We will have to see how this is going to be regulated to see that the environment is not really harmed at all. So, all these technologies I mentioned above are based on modern scientific knowledge. Information technology developed on the basis of information theory, theory of artificial intelligence, and biotechnology is developed on the basis of modern molecular biology. I mentioned that the Universal Declaration of the UN on bioethics and human genome, or response to risks for human dignity and human rights that arise because of the development of technologies based on molecular biology. For example, I mentioned that gene therapy or transfer of genes from one organism to another organism across taxonomic groups, or from, if it develops ever through gene therapy, transfer of genes from one human being to another can raise serious questions of safety and dignity and human rights of people. Military technologies based on knowledge produced by physics. I said in the earlier lecture, atom bomb was produced by physicists during the Second World War. Chemistry produced poisonous gas during the First World War. And mathematics. One would think that mathematics is a subject that has limited applications in technology development, especially warfare. It is not correct. Consider this statement, which I am giving below. Bruce Bovenbach observes, the Second World War brought a new alliance between mathematicians and the military, leaving behind a triad of complex artifacts behind. One, the atom bomb with its stationary model in service of energy production. Two, the jet propulsion for rockets, intercontinental bombers, and chartered travel. And three is computer technologies. Mathematics played an important role in the entire thing. He further observes, mathematicians or mathematics promises an infinite curve of innovations in precision, timing, coordination, miniaturization, new physical ways of delivery, for example, case of sound beam, and worst of all, new dreams of invincibility. Mathematics gives such kind of power for people to develop precise deliveries of technologies and targeting technologies by using mathematical models and reasoning. We are not saying that scientific disciplines provided knowledge to produce destructive and risky technologies, but the knowledge generated by these disciplines has the potential for development of harmful technologies. We acknowledge that the scientific knowledge generated by disciplines of biology, physics, chemistry, mathematics, and so on have been extremely useful for the mankind, humanity, in terms of understanding our own universe, and also in terms of developing better techniques in production. But they also have this potential, as I said, to produce harmful technologies. That is why we need to govern the technology. We need to regulate the technology. We need to see how technology is not developed in such a way that it can cause harm to people. Now, why should one talk of governance of technology? I said the converging technologies mentioned above pose risk for human life, non-human life forms, and environment. There is a need to minimize risk by regulating technology. And how does one go about doing it? I'll give two examples. One, the debate on genetic modification of food in India, especially genetic modification of brinjal. And two, the legislative intervention that seeks to protect biodiversity. The presentation on BT brinjal is based on a paper I co-authored with Jacob, Moratorium on Genetically Modified Brinjal in India, which appeared in Asian Biotechnology and Development Review. And the second one, it's based on my own paper, which I published in Current Science on DNA barcoding in 2010. The GM debate in India See, in our country, the debate on genetic modification of crops entered public sphere in the year 2002, when Genetic Engineering Approval Committee of India, under the Ministry of Environment and Forests, recommended commercial planting of GM cotton. As mentioned earlier, GM cotton is only GM crop approved for commercial cultivation in our country. In 2012, India cultivated a record 10 million hectares of GM cotton. Of course, people have expressed apprehensions on GM cotton as well. People said, if genetically modified cotton seed is cultivated, how does one make sure that it's not going to harm the insects which are harmless? How does one make sure that the cattle will not develop any health problems if they consume the residues of Bt cotton plants? There are concerns like this, but people have been debating, still the debate is on. In our country, we have the following regulatory bodies. One, Genetic Engineering Approval Committee under the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Right now it's called Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee. It was renamed recently. Then the Review Committee on Genetic Modification, RCGM, under the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. The ultimate decision has to be taken by the Cabinet on the basis of recommendations of the Minister of Environment and Forests, whether or not the country should allow the cultivation of genetically modified food crops. See, a case in point, I was telling you that it's about brinjal. Brinjal is a food crop in the sense it's a vegetable crop. People consume it regularly almost. About 9.5 million tons of brinjal is produced in a year in India, nearly all of which is internally consumed. That is, India is one of the major producers of brinjal, next only to China. China produces 59% of total world production in brinjal, and India produces about 26% of brinjal. It's also called eggplant. Brinjal is mostly grown in the states of West Bengal, 23%, Orissa, 20%, Gujarat, 11%, Andhra Pradesh, 11%, Bihar, 8%, Maharashtra, 5%. It means that it is cultivated across in all the states in the country, and it is a very, very regularly consumed vegetable. Brinjal occupies a significant place in the cuisines of all regions of the country, Indian subcontinent, and is also used in preparation of Ayurvedic medicines. And I should also like to tell you here that India is one of the countries which has a large variety of brinjals, about 200 plus varieties. We have been documented in different parts of the country. This is a great kind of a feature of diversity of brinjal, which our country has about 200 plus varieties. Now let us look at the process of how this debate was carried out and what decision was taken on Bt brinjal. The Minister for Environment and Forests had used evidence from wide-ranging sources, which included reports of scientists from India and abroad on risk assessment, views from the state or regional governments, the outcome of public consultations with farmers, consumers, industry representatives, civil society organizations, and observations of the judiciary, and so on GM brinjal. Public consultations which the minister held on 7 different locations, and the report of the expert committee 2 of the GEAC, or Genetic Engineering Approval Committee or Appraisal Committee. Now, how did it begin? In 2006, Mahiko, which is a seed company based in Maharashtra, which is a joint venture with the Monsanto company, which produces Bt cotton seed, which has proprietary control over BT seed, BT technology, BT genes, is collaborating with Mexico in trying to transfer this BT technology to India, which has done. BT cotton, of course, is there already. So, in 2006, Mexico seed company submitted a biosafety data on biosafety data on GM brinjal to the GEAC and sought approval or permission to conduct large-scale field trials. That is, they already have that product. They engineered BT gene into brinjal, and the company has this product, and the company said, this is safe to consume, this is safe for environment, we would like to do trials of this, field trials of this crop in different locations in the country. So normally, a crop is generally licensed or released to the farmers only after it is tested in multiple locations. So ICR, Indian Council for Agricultural Research, is the one which institutes of the ICSR are involved in multi-location trials. But this product being a product of the private industry, they wanted to do the test by themselves in different locations. Then civil society organizations raised a number of concerns on the Mexico's biosafety dossier. In order to address these concerns, GEAC constituted an expert committee that is called Expert Committee number 1. See, the problem here is the company which is selling the seed also says that it is safe. And whether it is safe or not should be indicated by a third party or an expert committee. In the sense, there must be an independent assessment of the claims of the company that in fact what they are releasing, where they want to try out is really a safe one. So obviously the company which claims that it is safe, people start doubting whether the data that they provided is reliable, authentic, and so on. Then the Expert Committee 1 recommended on the basis of its examination of the safety data provided by the company. The committee said yes, it is safe. The tests have been done, and the committee recommended large-scale field trials against which there was public outcry. Then, when the committee recommended for the committee recommended for large-scale field trials, a lot of people in the country, civil society organizations, some people, some independent thinkers, organic intellectuals, they all expressed concern about the large-scale field trials against which they protested. Yeah? There were large-scale protests and campaigns against genetic modification of brinjal. So, as I said, several groups participated. A lot of, for example, newspapers carried articles, and several meetings were held by civil society organizations and so on. What were the public apprehensions? Why were they protesting? Basically, the public were protesting regarding safety of BT brinjal and its impact on people's health. For example, if BT brinjal is consumed over a long time. As I said, brinjal is an important vegetable in the cuisine of our country. Every household consumes at least twice a week, maybe more in some cases. So what are the implications if one consumes BT brinjal for a long time, twice a week or more than twice a week? What are the implications for biodiversity of brinjal? The people were saying, the public were saying, number one, the company that produces GM brinjal may promote only BT brinjal and see that other varieties of brinjal are out of the market. The second, the BT gene from BT brinjal may cross over to wild varieties of brinjal, thus contaminating the wild varieties with Bt gene. This happens in nature, the gene crossover or gene flow from one crop to from one variety of the crop to another variety of crop. This can happen, and then the Bt gene gets lodged in many varieties of brinjal. So this is another apprehension that they had. The third one was control over technology by a multinational corporation. As I said, Monsanto company has a proprietary right over Bt gene, and this right is protected by law, and because they have a patent on the Bt gene. So it's protected by law. Nobody can copy it, nobody can use the technology without permission from the company or paying money to the company. So basically, this creates problems of access to the seed. Accessing the seed at an affordable price, and access to complete and reliable information. Now, the information regarding whether or not Bt brinjal can be cultivated in dry lands, whether or not Bt brinjal can be cultivated in, for example, hilly areas, this is what farmers need, full information, but that information doesn't seem to be provided by the company. The second thing that happens, access to seed cost at an affordable cost. See, if you go back into the history of Bt cotton, when the first generation Bt cotton was introduced, the companies sold 400 grams of Bt cotton seed at 1800 or 1700 rupees, which is very, very expensive. Then farmers protested against this high cost of the seed to the government. Then the government, especially in Andhra Pradesh, they used the MRTP Act that was existing in our legislation in our country. That the MRTP Act is Monopolies, Restrictive and Trade Practices Act, according to which the Act says nobody can fix the price in a monopolistic way. They use the provisions of this Act to bring down the price of first generation Bt cotton seed to about 500 or 600 rupees per packet. So that means how the government can intervene in improving the access to the seed is an important intervention by the government. Now today we have a Bt cotton seed which is second generation seed. According to the company, the first generation seed is no longer effective in fighting the bollworm, which has been the pest which has been attacking the cotton plant. So there is a need for a second generation Bt cotton seed. So I mentioned in earlier lecture that the company tried to introduce this second generation Bt seed, saying that the first generation seed is not effective. The pest has developed resistance against the Bt toxin or Bt protein, and so there is a need for a second generation seed. Now, one must understand in nature that host and pest co-evolve. If the host, that is host plant here is cotton plant, if you equip cotton plant with the Bt gene toxin, the pests also develop adaptation to this toxin or undergo mutations to overcome the effects of this toxin. Now that happens in the nature all the time. And one more example is DDT. When we started spraying DDT against mosquitoes developed resistance against DDT. So in this context, the company saw this as an opportunity to say that the first generation seed in cotton is not working, so there is need for a second generation one. Although the first generation seed was working in many states, only on the basis of the findings of the surveillance committee of the company, which found in parts of Gujarat that there's a pink bollworm attacking cotton plant, then the company said now is the time to introduce the second generation Bt cotton seed, and this is also called something like planned obsolescence. That is, you know that this is going to happen, so you are ready with a new seed and you introduce it at the right time. I said in my earlier lectures that planned obsolescence happens in all the time in our consumer durables like refrigerators, automobiles, and so on. That is, a company deliberately plans that some models of cars are withdrawn from market. They go out of production after 4 or 5 years. And then they say, if you go back for spare parts of your old car, which you bought for 5 years ago, they say, no, this model is out of production. We can't provide spares, so you must buy a new car. So this is what happens. The planned obsolescence is basically to maintain the production and also to maintain the profit margins, because the products like cars and refrigerators, nobody buys every day. You buy once in a while, once in 10 years. So the company has to survive. So this is what they do. They try to introduce what is called deliberately obsolescence in the production process, and some models are taken out of production so that the customers can come and buy a new vehicle. So this is what happens. Same thing is going to happen in agriculture, which can be very I would say very, very detrimental to promotion of agriculture, because every time they come up with a new seed, the cost is going to go up. The farmers have to buy at a higher cost. Okay, in response to the public protest, the GEAC constituted a second committee which submitted its report to GEAC. Because, as I said, public protests were there on the basis of their apprehensions and anxieties, and so there was another committee constituted by the ministry. GEAC constituted another committee, which gave its report on October 8, 2009, and recommended that GM brinjal was safe and it could be released for commercial trials. The finding of this committee, or recommendation of the committee, was the main basis for GEAC's decision taken on October 14, 2009, that GM brinjal was safe. That GM brinjal was safe for environmental release. So the GEAC submitted the recommendations of the expert committee 2 with its endorsement to the government for a final decision on the matter. Okay, so that happened in 2009. The second expert committee also recommended that GM brinjal is safe for environment. We can allow field trials of this BT brinjal. Then the ministry consulted several national and international experts, especially the then Minister of Environment and Forest, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, took a lot of interest and consulted several national and international experts in the relevant field. These experts indicated several flaws in the scope and adequacy of the expert committee 2 report in its evaluation of the environmental and health risks. That is, the report of the expert committee 2, which recommended for the commercial for the field trials of BT brinjal, the experts said that there are serious flaws in the scope and adequacy of the expert committee report, and in its evaluation of the environmental and health risks. That means the report is not adequate, it is not comprehensive, or it is not thorough report which has gone into all aspects of health risks and all aspects of environmental risks. So that is, so second kind of input that minister got was from, okay, let me give the statistics. Out of the 18 scientists from abroad who made submissions to the MOEF, only 8 supported BT brinjal. In case of India, out of 26 submissions, 16 supported BT brinjal and the rest opposed it. The minister, in his considered view, decided to enlarge evidence base by holding public consultations with the stakeholders across the country in 7 locations. evidence that ministers sought was by writing to state governments and seeking their opinion about whether or not to allow the field trials of BT brinjal. Many state governments expressed apprehensions and said they are not in favor of introducing or allowing the field trials of BT brinjal. So the minister, in his considered view, as I said, wanted to have wider consultations and held public consultations across the country. The minister, on the basis of the expert opinion and the views of the state governments, which had reservations about GM brinjal, and the public consultations, came to the conclusion. Okay, before that, let me say the public consultations which were held in 7 different cities like Hyderabad, Calcutta, and many, where in the states where brinjal was cultivated, there were several kind of questions that were raised, and most of the public consultations indicated concerns over biodiversity, concerns over cost of the seed, concerns over the health impacts of brinjal. And this data is available with the CEE, means Center for Environmental Education, based in Ahmedabad, which was given the responsibility of collating all the proceedings of the 7 consultations held in different cities, or 7 consultations held in 7 locations. So one can really approach CE for the data. It's available in public domain. We also used for our research paper in the data that the CE collected or collated from the proceedings. The minister, on the basis of the expert opinion and the views of the state governments and the results of the consultations with public in 7 different locations, came to the conclusion that A, the concerns over loss of brinjal diversity, the concerns over loss of brinjal diversity cannot be ignored, because biodiversity is the strength of the country. Right? If there is no diversity, we are vulnerable. Right? So that's why diversity must be protected. If you depend only on one kind of a seed, that makes you vulnerable. So you must have variety of seeds, variety of brinjals, so that you do not really face the problem of shortage of the seed, or disappearance of the seed, or the cost of the seed going up and up. One, as I said, the concerns over loss of brinjal diversity cannot be ignored. I said there are over 200 varieties, so we should protect them. Then there are no research laboratories which have the state-of-the-art equipment to carry out independent research to do the tests regarding effects of consuming brinjal regularly. So most of as I said, the results that were provided were given by the company. Right? Company has its own interest to promote, so the reliability of the data, people started questioning it. Then, on the basis of these considerations, the minister imposed moratorium on the commercial field trials of BT brinjal. Field trials. So, what it means is the minister wanted to widen the evidence base, and so he consulted the actual end users of the technology, that is the farmers. So this kind of decision-making process is an attempt to democratize science. That is, you do not take decisions for the farmers, let them also have their say on what kind of technology they are going to use, and we cannot impose that what we think is good is also good for the farmers. So farmers are the primary users of the technology. They must have a say in this. That's why we must involve farmers in decision-making process. And in this case, this is an attempt to democratize science by taking the debate to the farmers. As mentioned earlier, the second case I'm going to talk to you about today is the conservation of biodiversity. We have seen that on bioethics by the United Nations clearly indicated that the need to protect biodiversity, promote biodiversity. Okay? As mentioned earlier, in the context of the competition to access biological resources and the possibility of biopiracy, the Government of India enacted legislation in 2002, which is the National Biological Diversity Act, NBDA. The enactment of National Biological Diversity Act in 2002 accomplished two things. One, it established a national sovereignty over biological resources in the country. The Act said all the biological resources, animal, plant, microbial, right, belongs to the country, right? It gave effect to the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1993, that was held in 1993. So I should say something about biological CBD. The Convention on Biological Diversity took into account the possibilities of biopiracy, the possibilities of the exposure to genetically modified organisms by the people, and in also trying to see how to protect the biological diversity. So one of the important clauses in the Biodiversity Act, CBD, was Clause 8J, according to which it says that all traditional knowledge about plant resources, biological resources, must be protected, and the use of this kind of a knowledge, traditional knowledge, and the gains arising out of the use of this knowledge should be shared equitably, and the communities which have been protecting these bioresources have to be taken into account while carrying out research, and also the communities must benefit out of this use of these genetic materials which they have been conserving over the years. Now that's an important aspect of the CBD, and CBD, India is a signatory to the CBD. It's on this basis we have this Act of National Biological Diversity Act, and this is supposed to regulate the access to biodiversity and also look at to see that biopiracy does not take place in our country. I said the enactment of National Biological Diversity Act in 2002 accomplished two things. One, it established national sovereignty over biological resources in the country, I said including plants, animals, microbial resources, and it gave effect to the Convention on Biological Diversity. I mentioned in Convention on Biological Diversity, Clause 8J, which says the traditional knowledge about biological resources must be protected, and if they are used for producing products, this use must be based on principles of fair and equitable distribution of gains arising out of the use of such knowledge. That is, those who protected this bioresource must also be given some benefit. See, National Biological Diversity Act created the following authorities. One, NBA, that is National Biodiversity Authority. Let me repeat, National Biological Diversity Act created several authorities at different levels. The NBA, that is National Biodiversity Authority, functions at the national level, and at the state level, state biodiversity boards are created and they operate at the state level, and biodiversity management committees are created at the level of local bodies like panchayats, and at the level of the village, municipalities, and at the level of small towns to promote conservation and documentation of biodiversity and sustainable use of its components. So what we have is, at different levels, the Act created certain authorities to really make sure that biodiversity in that region in that village, in that town, or in that uh, uh, group of villages is protected and nobody accesses it without without permission from these authorities. So we have a framework in place to protect our biodiversity, but we have to see how effective is this framework. Uh, Let me go back to this. Uh, okay. National Biological Diversity Act, NBDA, as I said, regulates access to biological diversity for uh, corporations, associations, or organizations of foreign origin only after they obtain prior approval from the National Biodiversity Authority. Further, no person shall transfer the results except publication of research papers or dissemination of knowledge in any seminar or workshops of any research relating to any biological resource occurring in India or obtained from India for monetary consideration or otherwise to any person who is not a citizen of India or any corporate body without obtaining prior approval of National Biodiversity Authority. This is one of the regulatory provisions that the National Biological Diversity Act has. In that sense, it says in order for any company or any organization to have access to a particular plant or a particular microorganism or a particular animal must take prior permission from the NBA for any research, and they should not use this kind of research for commercial purposes. And if such a possibility exists, that they should really take prior approval of the NBA to go ahead with commercial use of this, and also according to some agreement. According to the Act, no person shall apply for any IPR or in or outside the country for any invention based on any research or information on a biological resource obtained from India without obtaining prior approval of NBA. I said in the era of the intellectual property rights of the WTO, there is a big competition to access biological resources across the world by companies to see if they can use these resources to make commercial products and patent them. And this has been happening across the world. People have been accessing biological material from Africa and Latin America, and also in some cases from India as well. But it's basically to regulate or regulate this kind of unauthorized use of biological resources. We have this National Biological Diversity Act. So we have a framework of regulation for biodiversity, for protecting biodiversity, and already there have been cases before cases that have come up before National Biodiversity Authority regarding access, regarding conflict of interest, and several cases have been looked at by this Biodiversity Authority. As I said, National Biodiversity Authority may, while granting approval for filling the application for an IPR, impose a benefit sharing fees. As I said, one of the important aspects of CBD 92-93 was benefit sharing, access and benefit sharing. If the community gives access to resource which they've really protected over time, over centuries, they also should get some benefit. They also should have a share in the benefit arising out of the use of that biological resource. Yeah, NBA may, while granting approval for filling the application for an IPR, impose a benefit sharing fee or royalty or both. It may also impose conditions including sharing of financial benefits arising from the commercial utilization of such rights. This provision does not apply to those cases in which the application for the right comes under the purview of any law relating to Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act, which was passed in our country in I think it was 2002. Regarding the proceeds of the benefit sharing, the amount of money determined by NBA would have to be deposited in the National Biodiversity Fund. The National Biological Diversity Act also created a fund of National Biodiversity Fund. All those royalties, all those benefit sharing fees have to be deposited in the National Biodiversity Fund, and which is going to be used by the National Biodiversity Authority according to its priorities in protecting biodiversity. Now, this is the framework we have, as said. Now, before I gave you the example of this Biodiversity Act, I wrote a paper on DNA barcoding, how this act can be used to protect our biological resources. Basically, DNA barcode refers to barcoding parts of a genome of a particular organism or a particular plant or animal, which gives identity of this material wherever it appears, whether it is used in food, whether it is used in food intermediaries, or whether it is used in some export of commodities, and so on. So this barcoding is like barcode that we see on any of the packages that we find in supermarkets, that every packet will have a barcode. It's on that basis that fellow will charge will give you the bill. So this same principle applies to this barcoding of organisms, and this is going to help in detecting whether or not there is some adulteration of a food by using this kind of adulteration of food with genetically modified food, because we know the barcode of non-GM material that's already that people are using. But if some genetically modified material appears in the food grains or food that we eat, it can be detected by using barcode. So I think barcoding is also an important activity that community should participate in, because they are the ones who have been conserving all this biological diversity in our country. So now, before I go on to this, we have seen the debate on genetic modification of brinjal in our country, how it has been, how the process went on and what is the outcome of the process. And I said that decision making was an important step in democratizing science. The second thing, I gave the example of National Biodiversity Act, National Biological Diversity Act, which tried to protect our biological resources through this legislative intervention, so that nobody can resort to biopiracy and so on. So these are two important pieces of interventions that really protect that really take into account the interests of public at large and interests of people in different parts of the country. Okay. Then see, when we also talk of information technology, I said today we are in the information age, and I said in the very beginning of this lecture, information technology is pervasive. It has entered all spheres of our life. It's production, it also entertainment, financial services, everywhere, banking, and so on. The important issues in the case of information technology are how safe is our data. For example, when I give my data, personal data, for example, to a bank, how safe is that data? Similarly, if I give my personal data to get myself an Aadhaar card, what is the guarantee that this data is safe? There is a big debate going on whether it is safe to, how does this authority, this National Unique Identification Authority, UAID, how this organization is to protect my data, right? How does one ensure that this data is safe? Nobody uses this data. That means, in a sense, personal data is becoming public, right? Everybody can, many people can have access to my personal data, either by by getting into the database already that is there in with organizations like banks, insurance companies, and so on. And how safe is this? So that's why you keep hearing a lot of these fraud committed by people by making use of your credit cards or debit cards, right? So how does one protect these customers from this kind of a misuse or abuse of this data? That's number one. Number two is, see, my information about my income, my resources should not be made available to a third party. If I can give it to government, but it should be kept safe. The second, we all use internet extensively today. We have social media, we have Twitter, we have people use Twitter. People express their opinions on Twitter. People express their opinions on Facebook. People express their opinion on the so-called social media. So I think there are very important questions regarding how does one protect the right of the internet user, right? How does one protect that the information that is put out by the user on the net is not accessed by others and abused or used to hold the person for a ransom, hold the person for a kind of a ransom, in the sense that, for example, if I upload my photograph, somebody might use it against me or demand a certain kind of money, certain amount of money, to see that he doesn't abuse my photograph. So I think this has been happening, especially with women. A lot of these internet frauds were noticed, and the important question is, how does one protect the right of the internet user? So we all give out our information on the net. We assume that internet is safe, internet is neutral, on the internet everything is safe. That's not correct. For every transaction that we do on the net is being watched by somebody, either the service provider or the the browser that we use, and so on, right? Every transaction is being watched or being seen by people. So in this context, how does one make sure that data that we put out on the net and is protected? So as I said, as technological advances are made, we are also becoming more and more vulnerable, more and more susceptible for certain kinds of activities which go against our interests. So this has to be protected. That's why there must be legislative interventions to protect the rights of the internet users, legislative protection to legislative interventions to protect the interests of the customers of banks, customers of financial institutions, and so on. We use our when we give out our data, we think it's going to be safe, but there are serious questions about it. So one should really come out with proper interventions to protect the citizen's rights, whether he is on the net, whether he is using consuming food, whether he is trying to do certain things on certain interactions with when he's okay. Let me repeat. See, we must protect the interests of citizens when they are sharing the data with the banks and financial institutions, and when they are using the net, and third, when they are consuming certain kinds of foods which are which have to be safe and protect the citizens from harmful effects. So I think, as I said, as technological advances take place, we become more vulnerable. I think as technological advances take place, the security question becomes very, very important. Security of our data, security of our life, security of our health. These are extremely important issues that one has to keep in mind. That's why what kind of model of governance we must have. See, one is a technocratic governance. It is basically a governance model proposed by, generally adopted by or followed by the states, the governments. It is based on assessment of risks, based on scientific expertise, construction of probabilistic models, and selecting model that theoretically is least risky, and making recommendations to the appropriate political authority for adopting that kind of a model for implementation. So this is how the risk assessment has been done by state agencies, and people have been trying to participate in developing these models. But we have seen that risk assessment based on scientific expertise or probabilistic models have proved to be inadequate. For example, the mad cow disease or bovine spongiform encephalopathy that broke out in Britain in 1993 was actually based on a scientific advice that certain feed supplements can be given to the cows. But after feeding the cows with these feed supplements, they developed some neurological problems and many cattle died. So the other example is Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan 2011. And these nuclear plants were built on the basis of a lot of exercise regarding safety tests. And of course, nobody predicted that could be a tsunami which can affect the plants in a very, very serious way. So I think what we should keep in mind is we must have a model of governance. The issues mentioned above calls for a model of governance that is democratic and broad-based, involving all the stakeholders, scientists, industry, end users of technology, consumers, and government. For example, donors and consumers and the donors in some specific cases when genetic material is being donated for research. This is because the design of technology has built-in values, ideologies, and meanings of technology. And these values, ideologies, and meanings are those of the developers of technology, which may be in conflict with the interests and meanings of different stakeholders. That's why there's a need to bring all the stakeholders to a platform to arrive at a consensus, to discuss, debate, and arrive at a consensus. In order to evolve appropriate model of governance, interdisciplinary inputs are required. That is, both natural sciences and social sciences must collaborate to produce knowledge about the kind of issues that are there, the kind of challenges that are there, and how does one really arrive at an interdisciplinary knowledge base which can help us in trying to address these questions. And ultimately, the stakeholders have to be brought to this table, and we should analyze the response of the stakeholders by using these interdisciplinary approaches. So this is what will give us some kind of a democratic form of governance of technology, which takes care of the interests and meanings of all sections of the society. Thank you very much.